Okay, so it's time to start Uncrowd's first ever webinar session, Why Traditional Customer Analytics Belong in Room 101. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we do start this session, just to let you know that we will have a Q&A section towards the end. However, if you do have any questions at all as we go through, please use the chat function, which you can find on the top, and we'll answer your questions during and at the Q&A section as well. So, introducing today's speakers. So we're joined today by Richard Hammond, CEO and co-founder of Uncrowd, and Sam Richardson, Principal Advisor of Twilo. So good afternoon to you both. Where are you both joining us from today?
So I'm here literally 20 yards away from you, but it'll be in a different part of the office. But I do like the deceit, the conceit rather, it's marvellous.
You could have said Barbados.
I am slightly further away, up in the north, so not quite in the same office, although I have visited the office and they are very nice. So had I known, I probably should have planned ahead and come down and joined you, actually.
You've been very welcome.
Next time, for sure. So we've got 30 minutes for this session. So without further ado, we'll make a start. So Richard, could you just share with us your thoughts and opinions on traditional CX analytics today and the challenges and barriers that people face using them?
Well, do you know, since you asked so nicely, yeah, maybe we'll have a crack at that. I apologise for the quality of my screen here, although it's kind of a lucky thing as well. If you get any more detail, this just looks worse. But anyway, so yeah, I want to talk about really the challenges of traditional CX measurement. So we'll look at defining what CX really means. There are 4 challenges that I think we ought to consider when we think about the best practice, if you like, with how we not only measure the performance of our CX, but how we think to move it on forward. And actually that links very nicely to what Sam's going to talk about. Is Sam's got a great introduction to some of the pitfalls and some of the things to look out for in creating and building and considering great experiences. So I'm going to give you 4 challenges, and hopefully we'll talk about an approach to finding a solution within this. But before we do that, we've really got to think about what CX is. Now, of course, the CX stands for customer experience. We all know that. We wouldn't be in this webinar if we didn't. But really, in the kind of the multi-channel world that we live in now, we need to really think about what experience for our customers actually means. Is it just physical spaces? Is it the experience with our online tools? Is it the experience when somebody looks for help? Is it how it relates to, say, a chatbot, for example? Well, for me, it's very simple, the definition that our CX is every part of our business that the customer interacts with, including the experience of the brand. And that can be very external to ourselves. So that can be how that's experienced on social media. That's how the brand is experienced in use. That's how the brand kind of makes itself part of our lives. So there are a number of kind of considerations we need to think about when we think about what great CX is. And that gets me to the first challenge. Now, the first real challenge here is that you don't know what great is unless you're able to measure your CX in relation to somebody else's. And in fact, it was one of our developers here who really articulates this the best, which is, and that comes, I think, from that kind of developer's mind, which is thinking about absolutes. If I'm going to put a number in my code, that number has to mean something. It has to be relative to other numbers in the code. And I'm hoping that our development team that are watching recognize that I've just worked out how you do code. So the first problem is that you don't know what good is unless you have a comparative measurement. So you have to know what other people's performance is before you can start to say my performance is in excess of theirs. And that's one of the big traditional challenges with CX measurement, is that almost to date, in fact, you know, broadly there's one exception, which you know, we might talk about at some point later on. It's us. The challenge is that our CX metrics look inward. So and there's a story I tell when we talk to the market, which is this camera doesn't even hide this very well, but I'm not small. I'm a big lad, and I could probably walk a marathon in 3 days. I can almost hear, even though the mics are muted, I can hear people go, "No, it'll take you 4, you fat." Anyway, I could probably walk a marathon in 3 days. If I really trained, if I worked at it, if I turned my life around, do you know what? I might be able to run it in 6 or 7 hours. And if I did that, if I went from 3 days to 6 or 7 hours, my family would be proud. My friends would be so impressed. I'd be patted on the back. Incredible achievement. But Mo Farah is still going to come steaming past me doing his 2 hours. In fact, Emily, your host here, Emily does the marathon in just over 4 hours. So Emily's still going to come steaming past me in that marathon. My personal best in a competitive context just doesn't mean anything. And none of our CXs exist in a non-competitive environment. We are all competing against somebody else. So that's the first challenge, the inward looking lack of definition as to what our experience competes alongside. The second problem, and I'm going to do the same motion as I did a moment ago, the second problem is us, is human beings, is people, and very specifically our memory. Human memory is really quite poor quality. Our recall is contextual. So the story we tell to a researcher in a survey to each other is dependent on the context in which we recall it. The way I might tell a story about my business will be different when I'm talking to a group of friends or a group of colleagues, or when I'm recalling it 3 years in 3 years' time, or when I'm talking to an investor, or when I'm talking to the market. Now, none of those things are deceptions. It's just that our narrative changes according to the context that we're in. And some of the things we highlight change. Now, if you think about measuring your CX performance and getting customer feedback, and depending on customers to tell us where we're getting it right and wrong, it's really critical that the things customers, human beings, pull out are correct, are useful, are relevant, are the things that the questions we need answering. So that problem of memory is a real challenge. And I've promised, again, one of the Uncrowd team here, that I'll use his analogy here, which is the cake analogy. And the cake analogy is an interesting one. You're at a wedding, and there's this beautiful cake there. Now, I'm going to skip out of the analogy for a second. So think at this stage that you've got a data set, and a data set full of humans trying to recall what they like, dislike, their experience, what happened, how they went through your brand. Imagine that's the case. And now you're back at the wedding. And there's this huge, beautiful cake in front of you. And the host cuts up the cake and hands everybody their lovely pieces of cake. And you're just about to bite into it. And the host says, just one thing, there is quite a lot of human shit in this cake. I just don't know where. Would you still eat the cake? I mean, Christ, no, of course you wouldn't eat the cake. Forget the fact that that's just horrible, the health implications, what it would do to you. And yet we do that with feedback data all the time. We use data sets that have inside them essentially junk, things that aren't real. And the problem is you don't know which bit of the cake, which bit of the data set has those pieces in it. So you can't use any of that data because some of it is accidental lies, some of it's deliberate lies, some of it has been contributed by self-selecting groups within your target audience. So the second problem is human memory, the way we recall, the way that we talk, and how that enters our data sets. The third problem, challenge, is surveys themselves. Surveys, there are some brilliant, almost artisanal survey creators who can create beautiful, tightly bound surveys that really get to the heart of an issue, but they only work when they're very tightly bound. So, for example, I've got a cup of tea just off camera here. Now, if you ask me, and a group of people like me, if you ask us, why do I have that cup of tea? And then give me some potential reasons why I might have that cup of tea. It's going to include things like, I always have a cup of tea at this time. I always get a cup of tea before a meeting. I was bored. I wanted to stretch my legs. I needed to hydrate. Whatever it might be, there'll be a list of maybe a dozen, maybe 15 reasons why I might get a cup of tea. The answers to that survey, when you say, why did you get that cup of tea, are likely to be pretty accurate. you'll have a really good picture of that that group and why people are getting cups of tea at that particular time. However, if you were then to say, well, okay, why did you get that brand of tea? The boundaries come off of the survey set then, and we're now into the realms of essentially allowing human beings to indulge in fantasy. Oh, because I care about this and it's sustainably that, and I love the colour box, and my mum always had this particular tea. The reality is, when you come down to it, that selection is almost always nonsense. It's almost always not actually related to the real reason you buy that tea. It's the one that was at Eyeline, it was the one that was on offer, but I don't recall that, I don't remember that in this survey, and the boundaries have come off of it. If you go even further and say, why do you buy that tea from Sainsbury's? Well, then we're now 2 levels down from that original boundary, and the chance of getting an accurate answer from a group of human beings when asking a question like that is essentially 0. And yet we make business decisions, strategic decisions off the back of that all the time. Okay, there's another problem with number 3 with surveys, and that's that surveys do one thing really, really well. If you give an unbounded but opportunity for people to tell you what they don't like about your experience, about your CX, you'll get a whole bunch of people saying, actually, do you know, if only you did this, that's awkward. This is something that gets on my nerves. This is something I find difficult. And you'll identify a whole bunch of pain points. And that's broadly what most retailers really do with their feedback data, is identify pain points. In fact, one of the big grocers for a long time strategically moved their business forward, they thought, by only ever looking at their 6 biggest pain points each quarter and trying to eliminate those. But there's something missing. You don't know whether one of those pain points, as distinct from another, is actually making somebody change their behavior. You don't know whether investing in reducing that pain point is futile, because actually nobody is going to your rival because of that pain point. It's just something people want to grumble about. And then you've got the problems about the squeaky wheel, about self-selecting groups of respondents. If you can ask some of the biggest research companies in the industry who's actually answering their surveys without naming names, they'll tell you that the set of people they've got is really not something they're comfortable with. There's a test you can do to prove this to yourself, and I've got about a minute or so, I think, left. So we're going to get number 4 and some solutions out pretty quickly. There's a real simple test you can do for yourself here. Is next time you get a request for a survey from a retailer or a brand, do it and screenshot it as you go through it. And then put those screenshots away with your answers on them, particularly the verbatims. And in a week's time, come back to it. But before you look at those screenshots, just reveal the question, kind of answer it again in your head. I promise you at least 50% of your new answers will be different from your previous answers. And that tells you everything you need to know about the security and validity of survey data. The 4th challenge, and it's a very simple one. The 4th challenge is, in this time of contraction in some of our marketplaces, although touch wood, we seem to be going through perhaps a shallower, less dramatic kind of reduction in economic activity than we were expecting. So there's some green shoots in all that. But a number of markets are experiencing contractions in the size of their activity. What is your net promoter score doing during this time when you're physically putting less or fewer pound notes and dollars through the tills? If it's staying the same, and it probably is, well, then you know it's not really telling you anything about real relationship to revenue anyway. It's very easy in a rising market to attribute those gains to this magic number. But without causality, you simply can't see in those tools where the real driver of market share is coming from. So let's think about solutions before we move too far on, and you'll be eager to get Sam in place, because Sam's going to do some really interesting practical stuff, and I can see her smiling off screen there, which is lovely. One of the solutions, and I've written about this now for a number of years, is to do a very simple thing, is to first of all be objective. Find out what objective measurements you can make around your business, not subjective, not opinion. What can you observe in your business that you can also observe in other people's? And that's the critical thing, going back to the definition of good. Objective, subjective, rather objective observations, empirical. This is happening in this part of my experience, and it's happening in these forms, and I've got this much and this much of it. If you can get that about yourself and about, let's say, your two closest rivals, you can start to build an observational data set. Then think about effort and gain, friction and reward. We call it shopper friction versus purchase reward. I'm not talking about reward points or loyalty schemes. I'm talking about, what does a customer have to go through to transact with you? And in return, what do they get back from having chosen to do so? So, for examples, Aldi arguably is a higher friction experience in some respects. But if you buy their laundry detergent, for example, it's very high quality, it's very easy to buy on the shelf, it's very simple, it's very obvious, and it's low price. And it comes out really well in I was going to say taste tests, but don't eat laundry, that's a bad thing, in side-by-side tests. So actually the reward side is really high. You're getting a lot in exchange for that bit of effort. And in your business, compare those two things. Look at, what are the 5 things I put in the way of customers, and what are the 5 things they get back from me. And finally, come back to that idea of avoiding the subjective in your measurement tools. One of the things that we've done over the last 10 years as an industry is we've sort of sought to disguise the subjective by making it look like we've got these incredible algorithms and maths and sentiment analysis. No, it's still subjective human opinion at the bottom of it, and it's sending you in the wrong direction. So that's the 4 challenges. Inward looking measures, human memory, surveys themselves, and the fact that we're seeing things like NPS stay the same even while markets are contracting. So those are the challenges, and I gave you hopefully a solution in a nutshell that we can play with. And what we'll do, I can't remember whether we're going to do questions now or we're going to do questions afterwards. So if Emily shouts and reminds me, we're going to do questions now, or we're going to go straight to Sam?
We're going to go straight to Sam, and we're going to have questions at the end.
Brilliant, that makes more sense than what I was thinking. So it's going to be amazing to hand over to Sam to start talking about some of the practical parts of getting to great CX.
I could sit and ask you questions, Richard, but that would just be a conversation between the two of us. It's really interesting because I've been working in experience for a really long time, and I like it's again, this moving of metrics or not moving of metrics is, I think NPS was probably why we ended up speaking with each other in the first place. But it's really interesting because I hear so much. I've been working in transformation, CX transformation and improvement for a really long time, but not that much seems to change. And it strikes me that the reason why it doesn't change is because we are looking in the wrong place. And, we did a big piece of research last year because we wanted to understand if actually customer expectations had changed. What do they want from experience now? And after surveying like 8,500 people, the big news was that there was no news. They want the same things that they always have done, which is a really efficient service. And that's not fast, it's efficient, i.e. the best way to get a resolution. They want access to expertise, and they want an emotional connection as well with the brand that they're working with. But when we dig beyond this, it's, so if that's our top line, but it's when we dig beyond it, further, that we start to see this kind of fall apart. Because the problem I encounter time and time again is that the brands we work with just don't know their customers. They simply don't know their customers. And another really fascinating piece of research we did, which kind of proves this, is that we asked brands how good we felt they thought their communication was to their customers, and 96% said that they thought they gave really good communication had really good communication with their customers. And yet 92% of customers came back saying brands really don't communicate with us very well at all. So again, it kind of like keeps coming back to this. We're just not looking in the right place. And I think that that's partly because the metrics that we look at just aren't right. As human beings, not only is our memory flawed, but we're also quite lazy. We take the fastest possible route. We, just want to get there as quickly as possible. So I think that there is part of that. Actually getting to causality takes a lot of bloody hard work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a number of data sets. It takes a relentlessness that isn't as glamorous as people would kind of hope it is. And I think that for me is just that getting to know your customers and knowing your customers is still really at the heart of it. I think that organisations that we see do well, actually there was one organisation I worked with for quite some time, big retailer, global, and they were so committed to knowing their customers that they would go and live in a particular country that they were launching in. They would actually live side by side, see how they lived, see how they operated, see how they worked. But it's just not something, that kind of research is just something that we don't even hear of now. You know, I work a lot with product and UX people, and the thing that they say commonly is that it's the research that falls by the wayside all the time when people are doing this. So I think that there's a couple of things. We're looking in the wrong direction, and that's why I think that, you know, a lot of these CX improvement initiatives that we see just aren't working like we say they will. According to the Institute of Customer Service, 17% of people have got an ongoing complaint at the moment with a brand. That's the highest it's ever been. So there's something not right. The second thing that I think we see is the language that we then use, because sure, we've got all of this data, we know we have to look in multiple places, but we're so hung up on words like transformation, you know, big data and all of these things that I think it's actually not helping people do the work that they really need to do, which is very granular, which is looking journey by journey, user story by user story, case by case as to what's going on. There's a brilliant organisation, they're a bank actually, great high street bank, and they did something so smart. Again, not a big sexy transformation word, but it's so smart. They said, right, instead of listening to agents and evaluating them for quality, what we're going to do is flip that and get the agents in a room, and we're all going to listen to the customer experience, and we're all going to listen to that journey and really have a conversation about it afterwards to say, what could we do differently? What's going wrong here? What might the customer be experiencing here? You know, just a real in-depth way of looking at it. Something so small, but I think that it's a really smart way to start thinking about improving customer experience. I'm conscious of time because I really want to get to some of these questions because I know that there'll be loads of them. So I think where we look is really important for the data. I think the language that we use and going back to some good old fashioned slow customer continuous improvement is really important. Continuous improvement teams got replaced by transformation teams. It's not the same thing. And to be honest, I'd love to ditch the word transformation, but, you know, let's save that for another day. And then I think it also absolutely comes down to leadership. And I know I'm not just blaming leaders. I mean, there is a particular kind of leader who is really relentless and curious, who can join all these dots together. There's a couple of Twilo customers that we work with that are brilliant. One of them is Car Finance 24/7. And there's a guy called Dan Graham. He's a CTO. But what he spends his time doing is pulling together all of these data points, having this almost like helicopter view as to what's going on and joining all these dots together so that he can then start really focusing on where all of his teams will start to make those improvements, knowing that improvement is never done, it's ongoing, and customers will always change and new things will always come out. So I think that having that kind of relentless curiosity and knowing that every day you're just at the start of something, not at the end of something, I think is also really important. You know, the data for me though still underpins all of it. It's at the heart of it. If you're barking up the wrong tree or looking in the wrong direction or just focused on a number, which on its own means nothing, 72, 84, I don't know, like it's not going to get you anywhere. But there's clearly this big delta between what people think they're doing and what people are experiencing, because you know, things aren't getting any better in terms of customer experience. So I think, you know, that it's time to stop and really have a good look at at what it is we're doing and where we're looking. And there's never been a better time to do that, because there is so much data available. There are ways to aggregate it. It's just, I guess, having that kind of ability or desire to change and do something different, because that's what this is all about, right? It's having the kind of guts to stand up and say, we're going to do something different here. We're not going to rely on everything that we've done before. I'm pausing there for Richard to come back with a comment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. I mean, there's so much to think about in there, that particularly, and I hadn't thought about this at all, but that idea that continuous improvement has been shifted to become instead transformation. That's an extraordinary thought when you give it any kind of level of perspective around it. And the other thing that I think really resonates is, you mentioned efficiency and value. And you mentioned how efficiency for one person is different from another, and value for one person is different from another. And that's entirely true. It's absolutely the case that what one person sees in one way is totally irrelevant and irrational to somebody else. And I think that's one of the keys of what you were saying there, and what is one of the challenges of traditional metrics and traditional analysis is it's really hard to try and account for those differences, instead of doing it the other way around, as you say, looking at the frontline experience, looking at the experience first, and then thinking about what people might take away from that.
Yeah, and just understanding the difference between the two. And I think, like I say, research isn't going to do everything for you, but I think that, you know, coming back to that, what genuinely are our customers experiencing? I was working with an organisation recently, and they actually said to me, well, you know, it's fine, we know, because our employees are our customers, so we just ask them.
Right.
It's not the same, is it?
No, goodness me, no. But, you know, it's kind of seductive, though, isn't it? To think, well, we've got X number of hundred of people who also buy from us are on the books, and they have to tell us because they depend on us for their wage. It's really easy to fall for that.
It is. It is.
Okay, Em, have you got
questions?
Yes,
yeah.
So we've got 4 minutes left, so we're going to cram in as many questions as possible. So Sam, we were sent some questions in advance. We have been sent some through the chat during the session. So Sam, first question for you. Do you have any top tips for CX professionals when developing a CX strategy based on outcomes from traditional analytics?
First of all, question them. Always question them and gather more. You know, it never hurts to gather more, and people don't spend enough time doing that. And also, you know, there are so many gaps in between those spreadsheets. What's really happening? What's going on there? Too many examples to talk about, but I think that's the first thing. I also really would like everybody to ditch the word transformation and just start really focusing on those small granular improvements, because we know that it's the accumulation of those improvements that really start to make a difference. So going small, I would say, is a top tip. Go small, and also start from a different viewpoint. So when you start from a viewpoint, how helpful can we be? What if we started this from a position of being helpful? What if we started this from a position of trust and building trust, or showing we care? If you think about those different views, then, you know, you start to get a well-rounded view, I think, as to what customer experience is, and it will give you a really different outcome as well as to what you're looking for.
Nice.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. And one for you, Rich. If you can change one way in how current CX professionals think, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I'd like them to think of Uncrowd first, if I'm honest. No, do you know, Sam's point about transformation is really interesting, because one of the things we often hear when we talk to the industry is people will talk about, we are enacting a transformation program, which is so big it frightens all of us into inactivity. When actually that thing about identifying the granular steps you can take is really important. There's another answer to it though as well, which is just as important, which is you've got to have commercial objectives at the end of it. It's got to be, if it's a retailer or a service or whatever, it's got to be about shifting extra units. It just has to be. And the last thing I would also love, and I think I'm speaking for insight professionals here, is I'd like the execs within our businesses to stop treating insight as a way to support an existing hypothesis. Actually listen to insight. Let insight and your insight teams tell you the real story, and listen to that and form your activity from the story, not try and reverse insight into fitting your hypothesis.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rich. So we're nearly out of time. So thank you for everybody that has submitted questions. We will answer them. There will be an email being sent out in the next 24 hours with a recording of this session, some of your questions answered that we didn't have time to answer today. And we'll also let you know more further information on an innovation day with Sam at Twilo as well.
Oh, yeah.
So that will be sent out within the next 24 hours or so. But yeah, just a massive thank you to everybody who has attended this session today, and also a massive thank you to Rich and Sam. Very insightful session. Yeah, we'll have another webinar session coming up soon, so keep your eyes peeled. And yeah, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it.